coup? Really a real possibility? Joining us now is Dr. Aron. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, currently at work on a book about Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. He wrote a column for the Washington Post Monday edition about the issue. Dr. Aron, thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So now I know that you believe that this would, have to be the people pushing this to really make this happen. But based on that poll of Russians being less supportive of this than in the past, the disasters that are occurring, is it fair to be having this conversation about the possibility, short-term or long-term, about a coup?
Well, I would call it, let's call it a regime change. Whether it's a coup or whether it's some other way of deposing Putin, we don't know. I also think that it will take time. The polls show the diminution of the support despite all the propaganda. But generally, the Russians tended to rally around the flag. It happens to virtually in every nation at the beginning of every war. It happened, remember, it happened to Tsar Nicholas II. People just adored him in August of 1914, and then he was killed 4 years later. But I do believe it takes time. There's one issue which could expedite it, and that is if Putin decides to take Kiev in an absolutely horrific, bloody house-to-house, apartment-to-apartment fight, with the number of casualties probably exceeding those that became an issue in the Soviet Union during the war in Afghanistan. That would, I think, the number of killed, the number of zinc coffins, probably unmarked graves, the lies about the number of people killed, I think all of that could become a catalyst and bring about first grief, then anger, then rage in people. I think until then, neither the military nor the oligarchs would dare to move.
Let me play you a piece of sound from last night on our show. Michael Weiss was on the show, who you may know, who has spent a lot of time in Kyiv. He's written about this quite a bit. And this is what he had to say, and I'm curious your thoughts on this.
I have been talking to Russia watchers. I have been talking to members of European security services, intelligence services, who have said that the likelihood or chances of a palace coup or some kind of military putsch inside Russia is greater now than at any point in the last 22 years. So politically, the regime is as stable as it was in around 2000, 1999, 2000, which is kind of extraordinary.
Dr. Aron, what do you make of that?
Well, I think he's right. I think, and that's exactly was the point of my most recent article and others. The threat to the regime because of this absolutely insane war, which made no sense politically, economically, internationally, and certainly militarily, as we're discovering now. It seems so insane that the threat to the regime is indeed much higher than it was ever in Putin's 22 years in power. That does not mean that Putin has not very carefully selected not just his security service, but his top generals. I believe I mentioned that the Minister of Defense is not even a military man. He never served in the army. He was a civil engineer and then Minister for Emergencies. And undoubtedly, Putin picked him out and promoted him because of his loyalty. Or maybe the lack of ambition, rather than his military skills or experience. And I think Putin, being a KGB man, has been very careful about this. Again, having said that, this is an unprecedented war. It's turning out to be even more graphic, even more brutal, even more blood-curdling than what happened in Afghanistan, which was very, it was far away. Ukrainians, as Putin told us himself, are our brothers. Sorry, I'm channeling Putin here. They're indistinguishable from the Russians. So after years of this propaganda, both the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Russians are killing each other. The propaganda and the censorship could hold off that rage, but not for very long.
Tell me about some of the firewalls, in effect, that Putin has put up for himself to ensure that something like this doesn't happen.
Well, in 2015, 2016, he created the so-called National Guard. It never existed in Russian or Soviet history. And the sense was that he simply did not trust the police and he did not trust the military. And so he appointed his former bodyguard, Andrei Zolotov, to create essentially he raided the police and he raided some of the army, and he created essentially a Praetorian Guard, kind of loyal detachments, or so he believes. At that time, about 250, 260,000 men, now estimated to be around 400,000 men. So that's the firewall he appears to count on. But this said, and he may be right, but this said, they've never been tested before seriously. It's one thing to bash heads of liberal and pro-democracy students in Moscow and St. Petersburg and maybe Yekaterinburg, or the intelligentsia, or the middle class. And it's another to shoot at the mothers of the killed Russian soldiers and their brothers, their fathers, their fiancés. Again, we don't know when this test will come, but I would not bet that the National Guard will do what Putin created them to do.
Final question. There have been some who've said, if Putin is eliminated, the person who replaces him could be just as bad or worse. It's just hard to believe that the person could be worse. I mean, is that possible, that if something like this were to happen, if there were a regime change, that the person who would take his place would be worse?
I don't think so. I didn't think so.
Right.
First of all, in Russian history, usually the next czar or the next general secretary, at least initially, is more liberal, let me put it this way, milder, less repressive than the one he replaced. That's true of the Soviet history as well. Here, there are two additional factors. There is an absolute sense of a besieged fortress. There's urgency here. Mm-hmm. The West now confined Russia to some, for the want of a better word, doghouse. Russia is isolated from world economy. And secondly, there are sanctions. The ruble is becoming worthless. They soon won't be able to buy cell phones, and so on and so forth. So I think at the very least, the person who replaces Putin would have to address at least these two issues, the relationship with the West and the Russian economy, which tied to the relationship with the West. And I'm almost certain that he would try to do something about that.
That makes a lot of sense to me, and I found it very dubious of those who suggested, well, if they get rid of Putin, the next person's going to be worse, and that seemed far-fetched. Dr. Leon Aron, such an interesting conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.